Hello, comrades. Welcome to Commie Reading Group, Stream 11. Today we'll be beginning Socialist Reconstruction. We'll begin with the preface. The thinking behind Socialist Reconstruction, a better future for the United States. This book, Socialist Reconstruction, a better future for the United States, is the result of a 3-year-long collective project that began with a discussion and decision by the Fourth Party Congress of the Party for Socialism and Liberation, held in 2019. The Fourth Party Congress discussion revolved around some of the particular ideological challenges facing a revolutionary process in the United States, where anti-communism has long been the unofficial religion, and in the world generally in the post-Cold War era. There is no absence of military struggle in the United States, but without a simultaneous ideological struggle to revive socialism as a legitimate alternative to capitalism, this will not happen on its own. Socialists cannot expect to make a revolution by being the best and most dedicated organizers in the mass struggles, and then hope that one of those mass struggles simply gives way to socialist leadership in a time of great crisis. Neither is it sufficient, given the urgency of the times, to win people over to socialism in ones and twos. A large cultural shift and acceptance of socialism must be effected, and a mass pro-socialist consciousness has to be deliberately cultivated now, in advance of a revolutionary crisis. If socialists are to successfully seize such an opportunity. For all these reasons and more, resolve to write a book that we understand would be unorthodox for Marxists. Among the Marxist left, it has long been a principle that no one can sketch out a blueprint for what a socialist society or government would look like. But that's what the assembled writers have done here. Not because we have located a crystal ball, but because it has become politically necessary for our current time. Previously, we have argued the sketching out such a blueprint would be an exercise in a utopian dreaming. It would be more useful to spend our time organizing and writing around a burning issue of the moment. After all, no revolutionary process follows along ready-made paths. Anything can be written on paper, but in practice, all political processes encounter new variables, twists, and turns that cannot be anticipated. When the working class comes to power, involving millions in the recognition of society on a particular level, this will not produce and generate so many new ideas and solutions. This will produce and generate so many new ideas and solutions. The new power will not be bounded by or followed the script of any one book or pamphlet that had been written years earlier under capitalism. Karl Marx himself declined to describe the details of the future of socialism, insisting instead that he and the rest of humanity were uncivilized compared to the future human beings of highly developed socialism and communism. Further societies would look back at our world and be astonished at how limited our understanding is. The important thing for revolutionaries, Marx and Fred Engels established, was to identify the contradictions within capitalism that would spell its downfall, and organize the class that has every interest in such a revolutionary transformation, the working class. Once the working class has become conscious of itself as a class, understanding its distinct interests and developing its own yearning for political power, this would set the stage for a socialist revolution. To that end, Marx consciously broke with utopian socialist and focused his intellectual work on a critique and analysis of capitalist development. A few pages are devoted to a broad sketch of socialism and communism. In the Grundgesetz, critique of the Gotha program, and in Engels' The Housing Question. His most important work, Capital, says very little about these matters. Even the Communist Manifesto limits its forward-looking program to a general picture of the rise and ultimate fall of capitalism, forecasting that the working class would overthrow the rule of private property. It includes a series of intermediate changes for the first stages of socialism in advanced capitalist countries. The abolition of private land ownership and inherent state control of banking and industry that shared responsibility of all to labor, free education for all, a gradual abolition of the distinction between town and country, and so on. The manifesto provides no further details on what all this looks like, and even these measures will of course be different in different countries. Since the publication of Manifesto in 1848, socialist and communist parties have mostly limited their publications and presentations in a similar fashion to Marx and Engels. Their programs describe their overall vision, what they are fighting for, and emphasize what immediate changes they would declare right after to remedy the central power problems of capitalism. It would be inappropriate for a party program to go beyond this. For political parties, the program represents the essential basis of unity for someone who is considering joining. One can be in the same party, in other words, without agreeing to all the ins and outs of what future socialist living and governance would look like. In the future, such questions may in fact become dividing lines, but for now, the primary task is for the working class to conquer power, and a socialist party must devise strategies and tactics to the end. The Party for Socialism and Liberation, which published this book, also has a program which is in keeping with the Marxist tradition and serves as the essential basis of unity for our organization, I mean. So why did we also produce this book, which in some ways breaks with the Marxist tradition of declining to provide a blueprint for socialism? This book does not substitute for a party program, but serves another purpose entirely: to demonstrate rather than just declare that there is an alternative to capitalism in the United States, and to start a dialogue with all of society about what such a socialist society will look like. In this project, we have enlisted as writers individual members and some non-members who have experience and expertise in particular fields and areas of struggle, and pose to them a singular question: if the working class already had power in the United States, how would we reorganize society? Of course, we do not pretend that any of the responses represent the final word or final answer to any of these questions. That can only be shaped in real life. Nor is every major question about what socialism would look like answered. Each chapter demonstrates that another world is not just possible, but quickly achievable once private profit is removed as the engine of society, and the existing technology, resources, and power struggles are recognized to meet the needs of the people and the planet. Our mission with this book is not to conceive everyone of every detail, but rather to raise the socialist and communist horizon, to reintroduce that into our day-to-day organizing work, to make socialism vivid and real, to give people a taste so they can order a feeling of helping. A full helping, I mean. Much of popular culture today is rightfully understood as a form of escapism, allowing a re- reprieve for the depressing reality of capitalism. Many contemporary post-apocalyptic films and novels attest to the truth that it is now easier to envision the end of the world that is it is to envision a new system. This book is an attempt to puncture that. It too is escapism, but of a different type. To escape from a moment from the narrow and horrible boundaries of what appears politically possible at the exact moment. To let our minds jump forward one historical stage and conceive of how much we could achieve under socialism. There is a considerable history of political science fiction, some of it quite specificated, which speculates on how future high-tech societies could be reorganized and in turn impact social relations. But typically, socialist organizers have only indulged in such conversations over a meal or a drink. Perhaps after a meeting or a long day of marching. Here we bring greater systematic thinking and concreteness to these discussions, making vivid the socialist future, and getting people to discuss and debate this now, under capitalism, is especially important for the development of any revolutionary process in the United States. This is the conclusion that the PSL has drawn after extensive internal discussions about the particular ideological factors that shape our political reality. It has long been assumed that the irreconcilable conditions of capitalism will become so pronounced, usually through the combination of a failed war and an economic crisis, that this will cause a revolutionary crisis, whereby the working class and the ruling class can no longer go on living in the old way. The shattering of the capitalist state and its institutional legitimacy will create a breach into which socialists can step with a forward-looking solution and lead the working class to power. Until that time, a revolutionary socialist party must focus on winning the leadership of the multinational working class by being the most dedicated fighters in all struggles, big and small, against exploitation and oppression. In addition, in order to seize a revolutionary crisis, to navigate all the tremendous complexities of such a period, and to defeat the centralized forces of the existing state, such a power must have the capacity for a concentrated and centralized action, united by its own discipline and revolutionary purpose. This is basically what happened in Russia before the 1917 Russian Revolution. Socialist parties were the only genuine fighters for workers and for democracy. In a war crisis, only the Bolshevik Party consistently represented the urged demands and interest of the Russian workers and peasants for bread, land, and peace. The great mass of the population in the Russian Empire had not become socialist in an ideological sense, but they wanted the Bolsheviks to take power, or at least would not fight them for doing so. In the socialist revolutions in China and Vietnam, the communists provided leadership to the national liberation movements against colonialism and neocolonialism, which was the engine of the overall revolutionary process that ultimately had a socialist horizon. Hey Retro Chaos Queen, good to see you. Hope you're doing alright today. All these experiences must be studied closely and have universal lessons, but they cannot simply be copied and pasted into our reality. The liberation movements inside the United States, especially the Black freedom struggle, are also an engine for revolutionary and mass struggle, but are operating in a very different context inside an imperialist state. To defeat such a state will require a close alliance with a broad working class and multinational socialist movement that consciously joins the fight against national and class oppression. In other words, it requires higher political consciousness. While Russia's example holds true as a kind of general theory of revolution for advanced capitalist countries, there are additional particularities that must be accounted for in the United States. The United States is not at a periphery of the global capitalist system, but at its center, where the capitalist ideology institutions are far more entrenched, sophisticated, and durable. When socialism and communism were relatively new ideas to the working class, such as in Russia in the early 1900s, the Tsarist government anti-communism could be quickly overcome and masked through the process of struggle itself. Because this country's ruling class has represented the center of global anti-communism, the unofficial religion of the U.S., this has left a pronunciated imprint on all political life and mass consciousness here. Progressive and working class movements that in most other countries would naturally move in the direction of socialism did not automatically do so here. Even movements in the U.S. history that had a socialist or pro-socialist leadership either had their history erased or had self-centered in order to not be crushed or isolated. The imperialist state also has additional resources to co-opt and buy out sections of the working class's leadership, even supporting some of their demands so long as they renounce any pretense of socialism. Compared to other advanced capitalist societies, the ruling class institutions have thoroughly marked socialism as an illegitimate, not even worthy of consideration, and even discussion of it amounting to treason. In such a climate, the class struggle by itself will be insignificant to overcome anti-socialism in the United States. It is illusionary to think that socialists can win over the great mass of working class by virtue of their good deeds and dedication alone, keeping their heads down ideologically, and then announce themselves as socialist when a revolutionary crisis arises. This will be seen or attacked as a bait and switched and rejected by a majority of the working class if all their prior exposure to socialism is of a negative caricature. In this situation, anti-socialist and even right-wing groups are more likely to emerge as the beneficiaries of the accelerating conditions of capitalism, since their solutions have been more widely in circulation and demand respectable. The opposition to and wariness of socialism must be overcome in advance of bigger crises on on the ongoing basis during periods of capitalist stability. Socialists must fight for the battle of ideas now, wherever we can, and as openly as is particular, in such a way that links the everyday struggles with the necessity of a new system, socialism, as the only solution to the problems of capitalism. This has already started to happen thanks to the cascading crisis of capitalism, rising popular socialist movements, and the political breathing rooms that has opened absent the Cold War context. The fog of anti-communism is already lifting, but unlike an actual fog, it won't go away by itself. Any space that has opened must be fought for and expanded. The historical breakdown between U.S. working class and popular movements on one side and the political movement for socialism on the other can only be overcome by building pro-socialist consciousness on a much larger scale. Political education and exposure to socialism cannot be confined to study groups alone. Transforming mass consciousness will in turn create the political space for more powerful socialist organizations and for movements and leaders to openly attach their projects to a socialist horizon. What does the battle of ideas consist of in our movement? Winning majority of the U.S. working class to socialism, or to be accepting of it, requires contending above all with the myth that socialism is a failed project, that socialist leadership and planning lead to economic stagnation of or poverty, and that socialism is the anti-democratic. Socialists in the United States in the 21st century must contend, in other words, with generations of nonstop indoctrination above the actual experience of socialist governments. We do not have the luxury of presenting socialism as just a new idea, because at the end of the day, people have been trained to think that socialism will not work, even if they like the idea in theory. This book shows how much could be improved once the working class has power. It shows that a new system is both workable and plausible. The book also takes a major talking point in anti-socialist indoctrination. In school and in the media, people are giving apples to oranges comparisons, lining up the average standards of living in capitalist United States with the socialist projects struggling to overcome underdevelopment and imperialist encirclement. Framed in such a way where socialism appears to be a material step backwards from capitalism, it cannot win a majority of the working class. This false framing always serves to put socialists on the defense. A true comparison would be to compare a socialist Cuba, for instance, to a capitalist Cuba, or other nearby capitalist countries. Here the superiority of the socialist system is evident. The capitalist United States likewise should be compared to what a socialist United States would look like. This book offers a necessary correction to the anti-communist false framework by laying out what socialism based on high technology and abundance would achieve. Another reason that this book departs from tradition, in offering a blueprint, is the way that we recognize that there is an existential crisis of a greater scale that is now upon us. Catastrophic climate change. If in previous historical periods, socialists could not content themselves with the general proclamations of how they would recognize production once in power, now this will not do. The climate crisis is of such immediacy that people are crying out for specific plans that meet the scale of the problem so the future generations have a planet to inhabit. As argued in previous PSL publication, Climate Solutions Beyond Capitalism, the capitalists have dragged their feet for so long that it is now too late for piecemeal and slow reforms to production, distribution, and consumption. This is especially so in the United States, the world's largest carbon emitter. Specific plans to recognize the economy are necessary to make it clear that the climate crisis is solvable. Is indeed solvable, I mean. A necessary antidote to overcoming Zionism and apathy. This book demonstrates that drastic action can in fact be taken once the means of production are subordinated to an economic plan, while still vastly improving the quality of life of the working class in the United States and worldwide. We do not have a climate chapter because it requires comprehensive action in all fields of policy, energy, transportation, housing, agriculture, and so on. Likewise, other burning struggles of our time over racism, women's oppression, and LGBTQ plus oppression are not separated into issue-based chapters, but instead threaded throughout the book. The answer is institutional and structural oppression is to uproot all these institutions and structures. Finally, this book also serves an ideological intervention in a period of general ideological retreat, where many movements worldwide have been generally backing away from the questioning of power. Another world is possible is the slogan of the World Socialist Forum, formed in 2001 by socialist movements across the world as a permanent space and process to build alternatives to the neoliberalism. But what exactly is possible? Is the possible other world? The alternative. In the period after the fall of the Soviet Union, a full-scale ideological offensive was launched on the ideas of Marxism and socialism. Many left-wing parties disintegrated or became demoralized, and movements rejected the long-held aspiration for the working class to conquer political power. Other ideologies filled the space, and the new generation of fighters that entered the struggles against injustice did so without a clear political horizon or anchoring theory. Well, millions recognized that capitalism was at the root of so many injustice. If and how capitalism could be replaced remained a giant question mark. This book decisively says, yes, the working class must take power, and should have all the confidence to do so. None of the necessary transformations to provide for the people and the planet can take place unless the working class gains power. If the ideas on the page that follow entice and engage you, whether you are in total agreement or have another proposal for remedying the crisis of capitalism, then you should consider yourself a socialist. That feeling of wanting to reconstruct society to repair injustice, and to more effectively organize our common world. Those feelings represent your deeper hunger for another system. They are, in fact, cravings for power, not individual, but collective power, where the best ideas to serve humanity and the planet can be applied and tested in real life. In the capitalist present, such a world may seem like a dream, but it's not. It can happen here. Those are some nice emotes, Retro. Alright, we're moving into the introduction now. The capitalist system confirms the world with problems that capitalism is unable to solve. Mass inequality, climate change, and war. Capitalism can't solve these problems because capitalism causes them. I forgot to take a sip of my water. Seth, how you doing? It's great to see you, comrade. Billionaires get rich, while millions sink into poverty. Fossil fuel corruption corporations continue to drill and mine even as temperatures rise across the globe. The U.S. government uses military bases, sanctions, bombs, and threatens to pursue an aggressive imperialist agenda, even as it claims to stand for freedom and democracy. For the sake of people and the planet, we need a new system. We need a new society. What may have once seemed impossible is now an imperative necessity: socialism. This book presents the Party for Socialism and Liberation's proposal for the first decade of socialism in the United States in the 21st century. In this vision, power is in the hands of the working class. The diverse, multinational working class has achieved political supremacy and is actively eliminating bigotry, racism, and national oppression as it expands economic, social, and political democracy. Major industries, corporations, services, and enterprises have been nationalized. Unions, cooperatives, collectives, and voluntary associations work together with public agencies to plan and coordinate production for the benefit of people and the planet. The working class leads the project of reconstructing the United States. What will life look like in the first 10 years of socialist U.S.? How will socialism be better than what we have now? No one can predict every detail of a future socialist society, but we can demonstrate how socialism enables us to redress wrongs and address challenges. Wrongs that capitalist classes refuse to acknowledge, and challenges its utterly unable to address because doing so threats its wealth and power. Karl Marx describes the Paris Commune as the form through which the working class works out its own emancipation. Similarly, we think of socialist reconstruction as a framework for how we get free. Equally free from exploitation, white supremacy, patriarchy, and imperialism, and equally free to share collective responsibility for meeting social needs and enriching social life. The chapters in this book sketch out central features of the socialist reconstruction: the end of wage slavery and domination by the capitalist market, the dismantlement of structures of special oppression, the transformation of energy production and use, the provision of universal basic services, the expansion of free time, and the engagement of more and more people in the active reproduction of our common world. Workers make the world run. Workers should run the world. Mainstream politicians in the U.S. push a deceptive old Cold War image of socialism and shared deprivation. They want people to think that the capitalist system, where the billionaires get richer while the majority of working people end up struggling to survive, is the best we can do. With their messages amplified by capitalist media, Republican and Democrat leaders alike try to make people think that socialism means the government is going to take our stuff. What's so laughable about this view is that capitalism and capitalist states that take our stuff. It's capitalism and capitalist states that take our stuff. Workers produce the goods and services necessary for meeting people's needs, but we end up struggling to meet our own needs. Capitalism appropriates our labor, lives, and futures, chewing us up and spitting us out for the private benefit of landlords and owners, banks, and billionaires. During the first year of COVID-19 pandemic, working people got infected and died, especially frontline external workers who are disproportionately Black and Latino. We lost our jobs and we were threatened with eviction, foreclosure, and homelessness. Hundreds of thousands of women were forced permanently out of the workforce and back into derogatory of constant cooking, cleaning, and child care. Billionaires increased their wealth by 40%, profiting off the devastation inflicted on households and small businesses while intensifying the exploitation of warehouse and delivery workers. Before the pandemic, technology companies like Uber and Airbnb were already transforming the personal property of working people into the means of production for corporations. I drive my car and someone else gets rich. Corporations and the state bombard us with the fees and charges and rents and fines, hounding us to pay money we don't have and threatening us with lawsuits and sometimes even jail when we can't pay. The demands on working class workers never let up. Not even during a pandemic that killed over a million people in the U.S. alone. Forced to labor in crowded and dangerous conditions, we face the impossible choice between getting sick and infecting our loved ones, or sinking into debt and getting thrown out of our houses. Millions of us didn't even have this choice. We lost our jobs entirely. Together with the Republican Party and the Democrats, have consistently betrayed working class people, built up the massive U.S. prison system, amplified and enriched racial diversion and oppression, indebted students and households, pursued aggressive imperialist interventions across the world, and failed to use government to guarantee free and universal health care, education, child care, housing, transportation, and unities. Much like their Republican opponents, the Democrats have proven themselves more interested in saving the banks than in saving the people and the planet. As long as Democrat leaders are oriented towards the interest and campaign contributions of Wall Street and the corporations, they will serve and protect that class, not our class. The working class. The class of those who have to sell our labor power in order to survive. Working people can't count on the Democrats to have our backs. We can only expect what we have already gotten, stabbed in the back. Everyone knows that this system of mass exploitation and oppression can't continue. More and more people are using socialism as the name for the solution. But what do they mean when they say socialism? In history and in the present, there are different versions of socialism. The version presented here begins with the abolition of the tyranny of the market and the emancipation of the diverse, multinational working class. Instead of being dictated by a system rigged in favor of billionaires, capitalists, and landlords, we the people should determine what we need and can coordinate a plan for producing the goods and services necessary to meet those needs. Workers make the world run. Workers should run the world. Today, all production is socialized. Nearly every product depends on the interconnected skills, labor, and contributions of many people, often from all over the world. It follows that the responsibilities for and the benefits of production should be socialized too. In the capitalist system, all the benefits are privatized. The few profit off the labor of the many. Decisions are made with an eye to the bottom line of making money, making sure that the rich are getting richer. The social and environmental impacts of this compulsion to accumulate are basically ignored. The only way to ensure that production serves people and the planet, instead of having people and the planet serve production, is to take it out of the hands of the capitalists and owners and place it into the hands of the collective people. Decisions about production and distribution have to be made democratically by workers and communities in accordance with a common plan. Had to switch the page. This is how we liberate ourselves from capitalist exploitation and market dependence. Too many jobs in the capitalist U.S. are deeply alienating. Just as the assembly line replaces craft work, so today jobs in a wide array of services have taken the place of the higher skilled and better paid jobs in industry. Whether low-waged jobs in fast food, transport, delivery, retail, warehouses, and call centers are highly waged jobs in information services, human resources, insurance, or some other bureaucracy. Much of the work in the U.S. doesn't feel rewarding to those of us who are doing it. Because work is organized through a capitalist labor market, most of us have to work for wages in order to pay for the things we need to survive. Food, transportation, medical care, housing, and so on. While some people are fortunate enough to get paid to do what they love, that privilege is unequally distributed across the class, race, and gender. Under capitalism, the majority of us spend most of our time doing work we hate so that someone else can get rich. When we are constantly worried about losing our jobs, constantly worried about making rent, constantly worried about making it to the end of the month, constantly worried about a medical emergency that could wipe us out, constantly worried about fires, floods, and weather extremes, we aren't free. But we don't have to let market forces determine our lives and futures. After all, the ruling class doesn't, since they control the state. They find ways to use the state to bail them out. So-called free markets are managed by central banks and elements of the state to protect corporations and maintain the position of the ruling class as a ruling class. In a way, the protectionism is already a kind of socialism, but it's socialism for the rich. What we need is socialism led by the working class for the benefit of society as a whole. People can come together, coordinate needs with the skills and resources necessary to meet them, plan what we should produce, and collectively determine how to do it. Planning already happens at multiple levels and scales throughout society. Whichever we are talking about the U.S. military, Walmart's massive distribution, distribu- distribution network, local government, social criteria, or a household's weekly budget. When planning doesn't happen, or when plans aren't followed, the results are clamatosis. I don't know what that means. The preventable deaths of over a million people in the United States from COVID-19 demonstrates the disastrous consequences of the failure to coordinate a centralized response. Countries such as China, New Zealand, Japan, and Cuba don't experience anything close to this magnitude of death ravaging the U.S. because they combated the pandemic. They combated the pandemic with proper planning, centralized leadership, and mobilized community messaging and organizations. This is a fucking dope book. I love this. Ooh, I can probably have one time for like one more section of this book. So we're going into climate change is class struggle. The last 40 years Yeah, me too, Seth. The last 40 years have made abundantly clear what Marx and Friedrich Engels argued over a century ago. Capitalism is as much as a system of destruction as it is a mode of production. Profit-oriented production leads to extraordinary excess and waste, squandering natural resources and devastating the natural world. Overcapacity in some areas of production is accompanied by undercapacity in others. In some places, there is too much, and in other places, too little. Competing firms make nearly identical versions of the same commodities, encouraging customers to buy what we neither want nor need, and even end up destroying unsold goods. In search of profit, owners pay workers as little as possible, resorting to wage theft and reducing hours to avoiding paying benefits and overtime. Some companies invest in technology instead of people, finding new ways to monitor workers more closely and push us more intensely. Other companies stop making things altogether, preferring to buy back their own stocks and enrich their investors. And still other companies operate like birds of prey, swooping down to buy firms that they tear apart as they sell off the assets and discard the workers. For the demolition of communities, ways of life, and entire industries to the ecological devastation inflicted upon the planet, production for the sake of private profit is incompatible with the flourishing of human and non-human life. The existential crisis facing us all is climate change, the steady warming climate. The capitalist class can't and won't solve this problem. Decarbonization, eliminating our dependence on carbon-emitting energy sources, is necessary. An absolute imperative if there is to be a future in which the majority of the world's people and species will thrive. But eliminating fossil fuels is only possible if we decommodify and decolonize energy production and use. In other words, only possible if we abolish the profit motive and ensure that all countries and communities have the energy they need to adapt and flourish on a warming planet. Meeting the energy needs of technology advanced economies by means of renewables. Wind, solar, and hydropower is already possible, so long as industrial production is substantially reconfigured. We must also change our approach to food production and rebuild our housing and transportation infrastructure in more environmentally responsible ways. Life under socialism won't be the same as the popular image of straight, white, and middle-class life in the late 20th century's U.S. A way of life only ever available to the few, and at the cost of exploiting and oppressing the majority of people in the world. Life under socialism will be better as everyone will be able to count on free healthcare, education, transportations, utilities, low-cost housing, more free time, and deeper engagement in determining our common futures. Life under socialism will be better as everyone will be able to count on free healthcare, education, transportations, utilities, low-cost housing, more free time, and deeper engagement in determining our common futures. Adapting to the changing climate requires the reconstruction of the economy along socialist lines. A socialist reconstruction will shift from consumption-oriented commodity production to the production of universal basic services, from fundamentals such as a free public transportation and guaranteed houses to concepts of a health and education expand to encompass mental, sexual, social, and cultural flourishing. A social economy takes off from and universalizes the gains capitalism hoards for the few. The goal of socialist production isn't private profit or capital accumulation. It's advancing the conditions under which people and the planet can thrive. Instead of capital's world and soul-destroying drive for more money, more commodities, and more accumulation, the motive force of socialist planning will be developing the forms of association that reproduce in flourishing social and ecological will.